Paul Cashman, everybody.
Hi.
Here's Paul
Hi, everybody.
Cashman. Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself. Paul is the founder of a new company called History in Motion. He decided after working for several decades and retiring that the next day he wanted to go back and pursue his lifelong ambition, or one of his lifelong passions built into a business that he had been percolating. And I'm going to give Paul about 5 minutes to tell you about himself. But before we do, I'm just going to tell the audience a few things to expect. This is going to be a 30-minute time block for me to interview Paul, after which there'll be Q&A just for 5 or 10 minutes. If you have questions, please hold them to the end of the session. And when I open the floor for Q&A, you'll see you move your mouse up to the left-hand corner of your screen, and you'll see a box for Q&A. You just type your question in there, and I'll read it off to Paul. So that's how things are going to work. And also, we're going to be enjoying ourselves. I hope you're comfortable. I've got my t-shirt on, and I've got my glass of wine. This evening, I am drinking a Pinot called Vino, very inventive. It's from Charles Smith. He's out in Washington. It's a low price point of about $12, $13. And to be honest, it's okay. It's got a nice front end, but it's a little sharp on the finish. And Paul, what are you drinking this evening?
Well, I'm drinking PG Tips tea. I'm a big tea drinker. In the morning, it's Yukon Gold. In the afternoon, it's Wisotski cherry tea. And in the evening, it's PG Tips.
Wow. I didn't even know that these kinds of teas exist. But I know that tea is really up and coming, too. You know, all these specialty outlets, sort of like Starbucks for teas. So why don't we give you the floor now for about 5 minutes to have us tell the audience about your reinvention story and your career.
Sure, be glad to. By the time I was 11, I had already been captivated by the two main intellectual passions of my life, one vocational and the other avocational. The vocational passion was math, and I pursued that at Cornell and Berkeley, and then for 20 years as a technologist, as a software developer, manager of developers, and then a technology consultant to people like the CTO of Citicorp. Then I reinvented myself for the first time and moved from the technology side to the more business and management side. For the next 4 years, I analyzed retail banking markets here and abroad and developed new technology-based products for retail electronic banking, like with smart cards and this burgeoning thing called the commercial internet. Then I succumbed to the siren song of the dot-com world, and I went to a software company as a product manager with the intention of making $1 gazillion. Right. What I ended up with was this mug. You can see the company logo on it, okay? And I got a very nice sweatshirt, and I was also laid off along with 2/3 of the company, and was unemployed for a year. I did manage to get a succession of 3 more jobs over the next 10 years, doing project, product, and program management for small to mid-sized technology companies. And frankly, the less said, the better of this decade. The work wasn't that interesting, and the management was second rate, to put it best. So when I was finally laid off in 2013 as a result of the financial mismanagement of the owner, I thought this was a get-out-of-jail-free card. I felt liberated. I was just delighted. And in that very minute, while I was being laid off, I decided I was going to pursue my avocational passion, which was and is history. I became interested in history when I was 9. The Israelis captured Adolf Eichmann and they put him on trial. And American TV was showing Holocaust documentaries. And so I was watching this. And I was watching these scenes of unspeakable horror and misery, and rather than feeling frightened, I was consumed with curiosity. How did this happen? What led to it? What followed from it? And these are sort of the driving questions about history, which have kept me intrigued in it for the last half century. How did we get here? What led to where we are today? And the answer could lie in something that happened around the corner a week ago or across the world 1,000 years ago. In 2002, when I was laid off for a year, I read a book about the history of New York City. And I thought how wonderful it would be to be able to go around the city and know at any location what happened there and who lived there and what the ethnic composition was. But the technology and business infrastructure for doing what today we would call mobile apps was in its infancy in 2002. So I didn't really pursue that idea very much, but it stayed with me. And in 2008, I was talking to some teachers about it, and they said, oh, the educational market would love something like that. Okay. I used some little known features of Google Earth to prototype a scenario of the first day of the New York City draft riots in July 1863. And people who saw this were just blown away, including some professional historians, because as the Google Earth timeline moved, you could see the events happening all over the map. You could see where the mobs were moving up and down the avenues and setting fires and lynching and fighting the police and putting up barricades. You could open any event and see the text which I had inserted from contemporary documents or images from contemporary publications like Frank Leslie's Illustrated Weekly. It was really quite something. So when I was laid off 2 years ago, I knew that what I wanted to do was to build that kind of a tool that would make it possible for anyone to create these sorts of rich media, animated historical scenarios without knowing programming, graphics, or digital cartography. Well, the practice and technology of programming had changed radically in the quarter century since I had last done it, but I sat myself down and I taught myself a slew of web technologies, and within a year, History in Motion was released on the web. I demoed it at various teacher technology conferences and got some favorable blog notices. And today I have over 200 account holders in 16 countries and more than half the US states. So it's the obvious next step was to build the iPad app. Well, that's a whole nother slew of technology I had to teach myself. That app is just about ready to go. And while I was doing all this development, I thought, I'm really enjoying this a lot more than when I first was a programmer starting out 40 years ago. And I wanted to keep on doing it. So this winter and spring, I took a couple of steps to make that happen. I spoke to a friend of mine who is the associate director of the Cornell Feline Health Center. My wife and I are big cat people. And I said, look, are there any apps that you guys can think of that would help cat owners or veterinarians or feline researchers? And he said, oh, yeah, I got a whole bunch of ideas. And we talked them over and selected one. And I'll be sitting down with him and some of his domain experts next week to actually get started on that project. Coincidentally, I happened to mention this to a friend of mine who's a professor of biomedical engineering at Stanford. And she said, oh, I've got a bunch of ideas for apps that I could use. Can I talk to you? So I'll talk to her next week as well.
Right.
The other thing I did was on a lark, I answered an ad in Craigslist for a developer at a nearby company, and they hired me. The thing that tickles me about that is that last week my wife and I celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary, which means that I have been married longer than any of my development colleagues have even been alive.
Wow.
So that's my story. I'm having a great time. I'm not sure where it's all leading, but I'm having fun, intellectual stimulation, and making a few bucks.
So do you mind if I ask how old you are?
I'll be 64 on July 30th.
So you're 64, and some folks might be thinking that it's time to cruise into Easy Street, and here you are, teaching yourself new technologies and starting a company and building apps for other people and answering Craigslist ads. Were you always this driven?
Yes, pretty much. I have our oldest niece once characterized me as a brilliant, driven person in her words. So I have to say, yes, I've been officially pronounced as a driven person.
Okay, at least you're not the mad scientist.
No, but I don't consider myself a workaholic either.
That's good. You need to find work-life balance, and we can maybe talk about that.
Sure.
So I want to start by asking you, rather than some preconceived notion, what is your definition of reinvention?
I guess I'd say pursuing your interest, and wherever that might lead. I think that maybe some people conflate the idea of reinvention with being an entrepreneur. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. Tain't necessarily so,
Right.
as the song goes. And I think that while that is a path for some people, not everybody's suited for that. A friend of mine once characterized me as more of an employee than an entrepreneur, and I think that's true.
Mm-hmm.
My first reinvention, when I went from the technology to the business side, that was as an employee, and but I knew what I wanted, so I was really following my interest or expanding my interest in a different direction. And here too, I didn't come up with the idea of starting a company. It was following an interest. I'm not sure where that's going to be pursued. So I'd say that's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting too, because I think some people think that the reinvention is triggered by, you use the word interest, and some people have used the word passion.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that there are other folks who opportunity presents itself, and they are either opportunistic or they recognize that this is an opportunity for them to take to change their circumstance. And so I don't necessarily think it's either or cut and dry.
Well, on the opportunity presenting myself, I'd like to say a little bit about that first reinvention, because that was absolutely a case of that. Whereas the second thing with History in Motion was much more following my bliss, definitely. That happened back in 1994 and 1995. I was working as a consultant, and I'd been at the company for 2.5 years, a small company run by a friend, and I was just really unhappy, and I couldn't figure out why I was unhappy. I would make lists of pros and cons about the job, and the pros always outweighed the cons, but I was still unhappy. I was just mystified. And one day I was talking to a friend, we were walking along the Charles River, and I said, I'm just not having any fun anymore. And as soon as I said that, it's like this 1,000,000-watt light bulb went on. And I said, that's why everything is wrong, but it's not any one thing I could point my finger at. Too much travel, not enough money, things of that sort. So I said, okay, I got to go someplace where I can have fun. Well, how do you go about figuring that out?
Right.
Here's where a tool came in very useful. A friend of mine suggested going to that classic book, What Color is Your Parachute? She said, don't bother to read the book. There's just a set of exercises in the middle of the book. I think he called it, the author calls it the flower diagram, and do those exercises. Well, the core exercise of that is something called figuring out your transferable skills. And it's a wonderful exercise. It's not hard to do. And what it does for you is it makes you look at your experience to date. It could be a vocational experience, could be volunteer experience, whatever. And it gives you a list of like 200 or 300 action verbs that help you to abstract from the specifics and the minutiae of what you actually did into more general categories. So instead of saying, well, I designed a software program that did X, Y, and Z, you say, I designed. Okay, design was a skill. And you come up with these general skills, these transferable skills, and you rank them as to which ones you enjoy using. And maybe in your current job or current or past experience, you really haven't used the ones that are most interesting to you. So now it gives you a chance to kind of rethink your experience in light of, well, what do I really want to do? And there are a bunch of other ancillary exercises that go around that, like what kinds of rewards do I like to have, and spiritual and monetary, and what kind of environments do I like to work in, and so on. But it's all kind of driven off the transferable skills. So now, once I knew those, I could evaluate opportunities in light of how well they lined up with what I thought I wanted to do. So that made it easier to look at things. But then the opportunity knocking kind of came. A friend of mine had gone to a regional bank in their fledgling internet banking department. And he said his boss, who ran all of electronic banking, was looking for somebody to look at electronic banking R&D, and from a business perspective, not technology. So he put in my name for the job, and I interviewed with my prospective boss, and then I interviewed with his boss, who was the president of the bank. And so we're talking, and she said, you know, Mr. Cashman, we're not looking for a traditional banker for this job. We're looking for somebody who's different. But you're real different. And that actually turned out to be a good thing. And they eventually did offer me this job, but I wasn't going to take it. And at that time, I was doing a set of exercises from the book, The Artist's Way, which you may be familiar with. I think Julia Cameron is the name of the author. And it's a set of exercises to help you enhance your creativity. And one of their key exercises they call the morning pages. And the idea is every morning you get up and you write 2 pages in longhand, and you write it as fast as you can. You don't think about it. You don't edit it. You don't check for spelling or anything. The whole point of it is to get past your internal censor that edits the ideas before they even come out. Ah. So as I was doing this, I'd been doing the morning pages for a while. And after I got the job offer, I was writing, well, I got this job offer and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I don't think I'm going to take it for this and this and this reason. But on the other hand, if I did take it, here's how I would go about it. I would do this, 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 and this. And by the time I finished the first page, I thought, oh my God, this is exactly the job I've been looking for. And I was going to turn it down. And that exercise made me realize that that's what I wanted. And, you know, opportunity knocked. And fortunately, it also kicked me in the behind.
And so, you know, the angst that you suffered over making that kind of transition from being a technologist to being a business management person, it was because the feeling of doing something that you weren't comfortable in doing gave you the anxiety, or like, what was the hardest part?
Well, you'll laugh. The hardest part was having to wear a suit and tie every day.
No, I wouldn't laugh.
That was a real big leap. But I think it was not just physical, because I hate the feel of, you know, but also it was the idea of the formality of it, and that all this technology stuff that I'd painstakingly learned over 20 years was now kind of, I guess I'd say, it counted for not very much in that world. And I was being judged on very different criteria, not, you know, what kind of code did I produce, or what kind of system did I produce, or whatever, but could I architect a business proposition and come up with a justification and sell it? And these were things that I had never really done before. So I guess that was the angst of really stepping off into the unknown with a tie around my neck.
Right. And now looking back on it, did you feel that you gained more than you worried about? You know, all those things that you couldn't do before that you can now do, are you employing them in one way or another?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, all knowledge is a good thing. And I certainly learned a lot. Oh, the other thing that was interesting about it was 3 weeks before I was supposed to start, the bank I was going to had a tender offer to get bought by another local bank. So I called up my prospective boss and said, should I even show up? Is it worth coming to work? And he said, well, I think they bought us for our retail banking because they're more strong in corporate. So I think, you know, I think it'll work out. And I thought about it. I said, you know, he's probably right. But even if he's wrong, it's going to take 6 months for the merger to go through, and I'll learn enough in 6 months, it'll be worth it. But I was there for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
So I learned a lot and developed skills that I never knew I had.
Smart. Yeah, my grandfather was a big believer. He was an entrepreneur, and I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And his advice was learn on someone else's dime first.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell me, did you do your reinventions in a vacuum, or did you get support, and from what or whom, or how did you travel this road?
Sure. Well, of course, the biggest supporter has been my wife, Jane. One of the things we share in common is a love of classic movies. We're always watching Turner Classic Movies. And there's one in particular which I recommend to you and your viewers. It's a movie called Holiday. It was done in 1938 with Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant. And that movie is 100% about reinvention. And there's one point in it where Katharine Hepburn is defending Cary Grant, what he wants to do, to her crusty, rich banker father. And she says, if he wants to sell peanuts, oh, how I'll believe in those peanuts. And my wife has said that to me many times over the years. So that's been a constant support. On the first reinvention, I'd had to say I got a lot of support from my coworkers and my boss. I mean, they really were very pleasant people and good people to work with. So I felt a lot of strength from them. On History in Motion, I got a lot of help from my wife's cousin's elder son, John Lean, who's in his 30s. I've been a mentor of his since he was in high school, and I got him his first computer job. And he's followed a career trajectory very similar to mine. Math at an Ivy League school, went to Berkeley, and then worked for software companies. Well, he worked for Microsoft, Google, and Salesforce.com. And he also, when he was undergraduate, he double majored in classics. So he's very interested in the history aspect. So right from the time I did that prototype, 7 years ago, we would bat this around by email. He's in Seattle, so we'd exchange hundreds of emails about this. And when I actually got going, he gave me good technology mentoring, and in terms of tools to use and so on, and ways to approach things. He wrote a little bit of code that got me over some hard spots, but he's been a major supporter all the way along. And then when it came to doing the iPad app, he has no experience with that. So by then I was totally on my own.
So it's a little bit of reverse mentoring.
Absolutely. That was
an open-mindedness to be mentored by somebody younger than yourself.
Oh, absolutely. You can learn from, as it says in the Talmud, from all my teachers I have gained wisdom. That's everybody.
I also heard you remark more than once that my friend this, my friend that, and they were different friends. Mm-hmm. So was it just coincidence that these friends, were there at the right time, or did you approach them, or was it just in casual conversation, maybe like we're doing right now?
Some people I approached. So, for example, the friend at the Cornell Feline Health Center, I met him 2 years ago. My wife and I have been big supporters and donors and whatnot. So we got a special tour behind the scenes from Dr. Kornreich, and so I got to know him. So I reached out to him. This other friend, the biomedical professor, when I was a consultant, I worked, her father was one of my clients. And so for years, I was hearing about his brilliant children. And it was years before I finally met them. And they are brilliant. And the children have become friends of mine. Children. I mean, she's a professor at Stanford. And, the other child, who's over 30, has actually done some graphic arts work for me on History in Motion and the iPad app.
Great. So all this support comes from all different directions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So how about, let's touch on kind of the biggest failure in all of this process, and how did you leap that hurdle?
Well, it's funny. Whenever I interview people, I always ask, name a big failure and what you learned from it. In the reinvention space, I have to tell you, I haven't had any real failures so far. The failures have all been in the unreinvented part of my life. I've lived a life rich in failure in some ways. Boy, failure on the reinvention front, though. This won't count as a failure, but I'll throw it up as an example of a hurdle. Very soon after I got started working on the development of History in Motion on the web, I ran into a problem, and as far as I could tell, I was doing everything right. I read the documentation. I was doing everything right. I could not figure out what was going wrong. There are sites on the web where you can go and it's basically crowdsourced software knowledge. And I posted questions there. I could not get any answer that would help me get over it. And I turned to my friend John and said, I'm having this problem. I'm absolutely stuck. And he said, gee, I haven't had this. I ran your code. I haven't had the same problem. What version of the browser are you using? Oh, well, I was 2 main revs of the browser behind him. And it's like, oh, I never would have thought of that in a million years. And it's helped me to learn. There have been times when it's like Sherlock Holmes says, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Coming to realize that has been hard, and I think that's something that it taught me.
Okay, good. And what about the most rewarding part of all of these reinventions and where you are now?
The most rewarding part is that I feel that I was always a person who felt, even in the face of evidence to the contrary, that I was kind of in control of my life. But I really feel that way now, and I feel like I'm my own master, and I've got all these seeds that I've planted, whether it's the app seed or the Feeling Health Center or this project I'm working on at work or whatever it might be. I don't know how my garden will grow, but it'll be interesting to have the opportunity to decide how I want to tend it, where I want to shape it in the future. It's like limitless possibilities. And when you feel in control of your life and with those sorts of possibilities open, what could go wrong?
That's awesome. So we're getting close to our 30-minute mark, of course, and I want to give the audience some clear sort of action items. You've had some great advice, everything ranging from books and movies. I've been asked how I know I want to reinvent, and I know what I want to do, but I don't know how to move from point A to point B. So if you put it in that context, what do you advise for folks who are getting started? What do you advise for folks who, need to stay the course and might be encountering some of those impossible moments?
The thing I would say is 2 things. One, I think going back and figuring out your transferable skills is a great, whether it's a starting point or a gut check along the way. The more you understand about yourself, that's a very, very good thing. So that's one thing I would recommend. Second thing I would recommend is there's any number of places on the web where you can go and figure out your Myers-Briggs type. Do that and read it. When I read it, it's like, oh my God, have they been following me around with a camera since birth? It tells you stuff about yourself that you would never imagine, and it helps you figure out things about other people, that they're not doing things just to drive you crazy, but it's because their personality is that way, and it can remove a lot of the interpersonal angst that comes from that. So that's the second thing. The third thing I would say is start small and have tiny, tiny incremental victories. The thing that really made it possible for me to do History in Motion began back in 2008, not when I did the prototype on Google Earth. Rather, I was doing a project for myself, which was to create a class alumni database. So I taught myself, programming language, current language, and a current database, and got that going. That wasn't the hard part. The hard part was I was doing it on my Mac, and in order to make it work together, I needed to edit a few of what are called hidden system files. Well, hidden files are hidden from users for a reason. If you screw it up, you're going to end up, really screwing up your laptop. You have to end up at the Genius Bar. You don't want to go there. And these files are not well documented, but I had to do certain things. And I was sure if I edited the first one, that was going to be the end. Okay, my laptop would be irrecoverable. I managed to do it. I managed to edit that first thing, and it worked. I managed to edit the next file, and it worked. And these are like tiny edits to this file, to these files. And each time I did it, it gave me confidence that the next time I could do it right. And the more of these you get, the more confidence you have to tackle bigger and bigger things. You don't have to leap tall buildings in a single bound. You can do it a story at a time, I guess. So those are my words of wisdom.
Excellent. Did you give yourself a timeline to make those incremental gains? And I don't necessarily mean like... No, just do it.
Right. But do it. Don't, kind of put it off and just, I'll get it to it tomorrow. No, just do it. Suck it up and do it.
Great. Suck it up and do it, everybody. And with that, let's move into our Q&A and let's see if somebody's going to post something. Come on, folks. Let's hear your questions. Does anybody have any questions for Paul? They're all sucking it up, but they're not doing it. Remember, the Q&A icon is in the upper left-hand side of your screen, if that's what you're looking for. So move your mouse over to the upper left-hand side of your screen.
I see a little 2 over the Q&A here on my side.
Oh, you do? Oh, well, why don't you read it? Because it's been disabled on my side.
Let's do it here.
I have little...
Oh, here we go. What skills, anonymous attendee asks, what skills do you recommend people have? Or are there any specific skills that would help a person reinvent themselves? The 2 answers to that question. One is the one quality that I look for in anybody is follow through. Okay, just promise yourself you're going to do something and then do it. So that's kind of the one general life skill that is good for everybody. The others, I don't think there's any particular skills that you need to have. That's why I say figure out what are the skills that you do have. And then once you understand that, and you may not really even realize it until you do that, transferable skills exercise, because you may be too mired in the specifics of what you actually did to see what the general skills are. So look at that and then prioritize them as to the ones that you really like to use, and then see what that enables you to do. So that's my question there. Then Kenneth Simon says, I sent one in. I'm not sure what that is, but okay.
That probably means there was a question submitted, but my Q&A has been disabled. Okay. So
Ann Howard says, may I ask your Myers-Briggs type?
Yeah, I was going to say that too.
I am an INTJ. I is intuitive, so we're people who read between the lines. NT kind of goes together. It's people who are systems thinkers. I is introverted. Introverted. That's it. N is intuitive. T is a logical thinker, as opposed to a feeler. So NTs are people who really are good at intuitive about systems. Not surprising, math, programming, etc. And J is a judger, which means I like to make decisions quickly and move on. Oh, good. So Ann is an INTJ.
And I'm an ENTJ.
ENTJ. What a surprise. That's a great entrepreneurial type. My wife is an ISFP, so she's almost the exact opposite of me.
Very interesting.
But I have to say, once I understood what those types are, it's like, now I understand all the stuff that drove me crazy about it for years.
Well, you also have to know what the other people are in order for it all to make sense. There's another system of tests, kind of similar, but it's called Taylor Protocol's Core Value Index. Measures somewhat different things, but it does the same enlightenment. Like, that's why, you know, I either don't relate to you, or we have, you know, frustrating conversations, or my husband and I always say we're talking Chinese, Japanese, and neither one of us understand those languages.
Right. Ken Simon asks, are there any other tests you recommend besides Myers? I don't know any, so I can't say one way or the other.
Right.
Then Cheryl Hikes, can't quite tell, Hikes asks, would you say that there is a reinvention cycle? Does it take a certain period of time? How do you know if you succeeded? I really haven't given myself any particular period of time, which is funny, because INTJs, or NTs in particular, think of time in terms of periods. Okay, the period from now until I launch History in Motion, or, you know, they're bounded things. Other types think of times in other ways. By the way, there's two books I would recommend. One is called Do What You Are, and I'll try and look up look that up and send you, Hollis, the information about that book. Maybe you can post it someplace.
Yep.
And the other one is I'm blanking, but I'll think of it. But they're two good books that really go into the Myers-Briggs stuff in inordinate detail. It's really, really good. Anyway, Reinvention Cycle. No, how do you know if you succeeded? That's a good question. And I think the answer for me is, if I feel that I'm succeeding, then I've succeeded. I don't think there's some other external benchmark that you could say. I mean, you might set yourself one, like, you know, I make so much money, or I've achieved this position, or I've got so many customers, or I can make a living doing X. I'd say internal satisfaction is really the main thing as far as I'm concerned.
Right. It kind of goes back to that conversation you were having as you walked along the Charles, and you had your aha moment of,
yep,
I'm just not having fun. And, you know, perhaps in your instance, the minute that you started having, you know, real fun is when you've reinvented.
Yes. I that's it. It's that kind of internal, everything is kind of lined up, and I'm, you know, and you know, it may come upon you. So much of my life is thinking about movies, the producers, and where Zero Mostel says to Gene Wilder, you're happy, and he says, well, what do you know about that? I'm happy, and he starts dancing around. You may not realize until somebody says you're happy,
right? Or
you say, you know, I'm not happy,
right? And it can be reinvention as a state of mind.
Exactly.
Not state
of
being. Yeah.
So Ann Howard asked, have your reinventions been about moving towards something new, away from something you don't want, or a combination of both? Well, certainly the first one, going into the business side as opposed to the technology side, was moving towards something new. I mean, yes, I was unhappy at my company, but that was an artifact of a lot of things. And I didn't, if I had found maybe a technology company and continuing doing more technology work that didn't have some of the negatives that made me unhappy, I might have been happy doing that. This was just an opportunity that came up, and it turned out to be something very new. With History in Motion, I had been thinking for years in one way or another of doing something with history. I mean, long ago, I was thinking about writing history books. But then I came up with the idea of History in Motion. And yes, again, I was moving away from something I didn't want, which was, 10 years of frustrating jobs. But it wasn't that was giving me the impetus to move. I knew I wanted to go in that direction eventually.
Great. Well, I'm going to have to, even if everybody's asking more questions, if there are more questions, we can answer them by email, and we'll update everybody.
Happy to do it.
Yeah. So folks, if you have more questions of Paul, please send them in to webcasts@reinventionworks.com. And I am going to attempt to show you guys. Okay, here's our screen, and here's how you can get a hold of Paul if you'd like. He's been gracious enough to put his contact information out there. His email is pcashman21@gmail.com. His website is historyinmotion.org. And I don't know how active you are on Twitter, but Paul does have a Twitter handle. It's at pcashman21. I want to remind you all that these are weekly live webcast series. You can learn more about them at any time by going to reinventionworks.com/webcasts. Next Wednesday, our guest will be Antonella Zangari. She's the founder of the gluten-free bake shop called Crumville. Antonella was a fashion photographer. She was seriously ill and diagnosed with celiac, and eventually had to give up all the food that she was raised in Italy on. So she went into business for herself to make yummy, good food. And now she ships it to 13 states across the country. I think it's 13, might be 26. I have to check on that. We can ask her next week. So please register, tell your friends. And if you are using any social media, our hashtag is #ReinventionWorks. I thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you very much, Paul. Any last words?
Go out and reinvent yourself. Just do one little thing, just one little thing this week that'll build up your confidence.
One little thing. You hear that, everybody? That's the advice. So thank you so much for coming. Thanks, Paul. Everybody, have a great rest of the week. See you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.